Okay. All right. I think we'll get started. Good morning, good Friday morning to everybody, and welcome to Great Homes for Greater Manchester, the first virtual summit. We started doing this literally before the lockdown. A lot has changed since then, but this is the third in our series. So we were very keen to make sure that we had an opportunity to reflect on the impact, but also thinking forward about the recovery to build recovery and what that means. So, hold on a second. Not seeing everything I need to see. So, so what we're going to do today is we're going to have a question. We're going to focus very much on how we deliver healthy, sustainable, and quality housing, and to address the big question really is, what are those priorities for Greater Manchester in recovery from COVID-19. Delighted that we've got Charlie Norman from Oscare St Vincent, who who we've worked with on this session, and also representing Greater Manchester housing providers. We've also got from the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, McCourt and Sharon Hanbury, and we're delighted that we've got Jack Gould from the Greater Manchester Health and Social Care Partnership. Later we will have contributions perhaps from a more national perspective in terms of Dr. Daniel Slade from the Town and Country Planning Association, and Richard Blyth from the Royal Town Planning Institute. There are about 30 plus people on the webinar today, and I hope all will want to chip in and give us your thoughts on where we go from here. Actually, I think I might just sort of put a little context into where we are. You know, as I said earlier, the COVID-19 crisis has demonstrated there is a great resilience and innovation in the housing sector across Greater Manchester, but it's also highlighted the shortfalls but also put priorities in sharper focus. Indeed, the way we work, live, rest and play has really been turned on its head. And we know it will continue to change as we move forward into recovery. But the link between our health and housing has never been more acute and relevant. Support and social care has also been very much in the spotlight, and quite rightly so. And as we move forward to recovery, Greater Manchester will want to lead the way in terms of supporting the outdoor environment. We need to sort of today explore how we can embed some of the positives out of the crisis to make sure that we have quality housing and healthy housing, and how we can do housing differently in Greater Manchester. And invest in green innovation, jobs and skills to build those healthy and sustainable homes that we need. So I'm going to bring you all in. If we just move up very quickly onto the housekeeping slide, Emily, that would be great. Oh, it's me, I have to do it. Sorry, I'll go one forward. So the session is being recorded, as you saw, and will be shared on the website in due course, and that's great. Ultimately, what we want to do is collect all this information and come up with a report and to feed back in to the Greater Manchester housing strategy in terms of what you think, but also to help put things in context. I know obviously the Mayor, Andy Burnham, is very keen on the, and has coined the term being widely used, build back better. This is a great opportunity to get some of the greatest in Greater Manchester to really lead the way. Please do tweet, use the hashtag #BuildBackBetter, and also at GH4GM to continue the debate online. Use the Q&A function, and if you have a question that you want to ask, just chip in. And whilst you're not talking, please mute your microphone, but also remember to unmute yourself when you are speaking. But we'll keep a close eye on everything. So just quickly going back, the questions that we're going to address today, hopefully, are the big question: what are the priorities for the Greater Manchester in housing in recovery in terms of delivering healthy, accessible and sustainable housing with improved health and social care outcomes? Also, what is Greater Manchester doing differently to meet those housing and care needs of an ageing population? And let's look, as I said, at Greater Manchester's plans to deliver zero carbon housing. What does that look like in the context of green recovery? And can Greater Manchester raise housing standards in the private rented sector and all sectors really to deliver quality and healthy homes at scale? So I'm going to stop sharing the screen now, I think. Stop share, and I'm going back and see you all there. Lovely. Okay, good to see you. There we are. So what I wanted to do to sort of kickstart the debate was to ask Charlie Norman to give her thoughts on that big question, but also to look specifically at, sorry, hang on. Sorry, it won't be a minute. It's because my printer's not working. So, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, sorry, I got it now. Sorry. Okay. So Charlie, to set out the context, but also the big question here is, what should Greater Manchester do differently to meet the housing and care needs of an ageing population? So if you would like to give us your thoughts on that, Charlie, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. I think in terms of your last slide, Jill, I think the answer to all of those priorities is that we have to do all of the above. And that whilst we're looking at things through the lens of COVID-19 and what's just happened and the unprecedented time we find ourselves in, we still have a housing crisis, we still have a climate crisis, we still have a social care crisis. So, and we do need to carry on leveraging all the brilliant work we've been doing together. Greater Manchester housing providers, the 27 housing providers, the CA, the 10 local authorities, and the Health and Social Care Partnership. So really important that we carry on and leverage that brilliant relationship that we've built up over the last 4 or 5 years to actually do things at pace and at scale now to address what's happened with the pandemic. So just some background information. We're working on the second iteration of the Memorandum of Understanding, which this time is a tripartite agreement, and with the Health and Social Care Partnership, which is really important. I think, as you said, Jill, at the beginning, there's never been a more important time to address inequality, health inequalities in particular. And they've all been laid bare, haven't they? Inequality generally has been laid bare by the pandemic, and the lack of resilience in some ways in some of our communities. So I think the housing sector has to be part of recovery and a key part of recovery. So whether that's fiscal recovery, stimulating the economy through house building and through green investment, that's going to be really, really important. And acting in that counter-cyclical way that we always have done in the past in building social and affordable housing. And we've got a massive window of opportunity here to make sure that some things don't happen, such as the rough sleepers not returning to the streets, and there's a move on arrangement there. Building local resilience, and this thing about caring and valuing carers and valuing social care, which has been absolutely one of the highlights of this situation, one of the positives. We can't let that drop, and we've got to continue with our efforts to integrate social care and to value it, and value it as a career opportunity for people as well. And just think about the loss of livelihoods and the impact on health and well-being. So we do have to build back better. I think specialist accommodation and homes that are age friendly are going to become even more important than they were before the pandemic. So it's a thing dear to my heart, that one. So we'd already done that census work with Housing Glyn about what we have now, the existing provision we have, and also what we need going forward. And we've got some very specific figures there, such as we need another 8,000 sheltered housing homes and 8,561 extra care homes to 2035. But we've also got an awful lot of tired type of sheltered homes, and that we need to invest in. And we do need to think about whether we can lobby for more investment for repurposing and remodelling of those existing schemes, and they could be repurposed for something else as well. And it's not all about extra care, that's a very small percentage. It's about most older people live in their own homes in the community. So that's where the social care and healthy homes and enabling people to live independently in their own home has got to be a key part of our strategy. And that, I think, it's using DFGs appropriately, using adaptations money appropriately. Just thinking about things differently, and it's about age-friendly spaces, not just about the buildings that we have and that we build in future. So, and intergenerational living, using the town centre strategies for older persons accommodation. And there's some brilliant examples of things like happy living, where people have downsized and moved, or right-sized and moved into what feels like, we've got a scheme in Bury that's a happy scheme, and people moved into it. Their health outcomes have been absolutely brilliant since moving in. And they say they feel like it's like being on holiday with really great space standards, and it feels with nice balconies, and feels like you're on holiday, but you're in Greater Manchester, so you're not quite in the, although it's quite sunny now, isn't it? I mean, commissioning's got to change. I think we've got to carry on looking at commissioning and care and support needs, and the longer term commissioning of care. I think we need higher grant rates where we are building new homes for ageing population. As I said, more money for remodelling and retrofitting as well. And addressing the thing around fuel poverty and zero carbon standards, because we've still got the climate crisis that we need to address. So there's loads around tech-enabled care. I mean, we've all got used, haven't we, to going doctor's appointments, and I had a physiotherapy appointment by telephone, which was ridiculous because I couldn't sort of decide what I was doing. But and I suggested that should be by video conference, and that, you know, going forward, there will be more. I think 90% of appointments now are taking place by video conference and telephone, and are being just as effective. So I think we need to look at smart home technology as well. So there's loads to do. I mean, it's blue sky stuff. It's really thinking about how we use technology, and helping people to stay in their own homes, because people want to stay in their own homes largely. I think having a diverse range of options, things like the housing options for older persons project that we had, which has helped people to be discharged from hospital into appropriate accommodation, is really important. And just think about the way that we do things and the way that we integrate social care with health and housing. And we all know that extra care housing, sheltered housing, that kind of thing saves a lot more money and is much better than residential care. And I think we might have a slight branding issue with care homes in future and older persons housing, given what's happened through the pandemic. But the social housing sector has been actually really good, and there's been a really good track record of looking after people and having really good standards in schemes to look after things that have happened from the pandemic. So loads of work to be done on living well at home. We need to look about housing LIN modelling in the census that we did, and look at what we need to build going forward, and make a case for doing that together, and make a deal with Homes England about higher grant rates. Money for remodelling, tap into transforming care, move on funding. I think we need to do a big engagement piece on what we're going to do on zero carbon measures with people in the community. I think that's going to be really important. Perhaps tap into planning. Obviously there's going to be issues around that. One public estate, access to land for affordable housing, and just rethink the things that we were already doing. And that thing about us being the community anchor, the housing associations, and playing that community anchor role, and building community resilience, because there has been a massive issue with community resilience that we've all seen. So I just think it's really important that we go with, you know, a healthy home for all in Greater Manchester, really, really important. And we need to support each other to do that, work with the local authorities, the CA and the Health and Social Care Partnership, and just value social care and value that integration piece, and bring us some of the priorities we've been looking at that we were already working on with health and housing really do come to the fore. So, you know, working on mental health, resilience, the supported housing things, specialist housing things. So I think, if anything, for me, I think we've just got to do so much more. We've got to bring forward and escalate some of the things that we're already working on, and do them quicker and work together on them more. So I'll leave it at that, just as a bit of context. But I just think we've got so much to do, and we just need to rebuild, and we do need to rebuild back better. I heard a great expression, which is people are talking about bounce back. And I think we need to bounce forward and take forward the learning that we've got. So rather than talking about going back, we need to go forward. So
yeah, we certainly do. And maybe on this call we can talk about what acceleration actually looks like as you link it to really the economy. So it's just a fascinating story, but it's a story we don't know how it's going to end. But in terms of how quickly we can sort of take forward some of those ideas and that innovation which we're talking about today, I think it's really key. That's fantastic, Charlie. Thanks very much. I'm now going to bring in from the GMCA, Ailing, I never know how to pronounce your name. How do you say it?
It's Aisling.
Ashley, that's it. I know, I have met you and I always say the same. So Ashley and Sharon, to give really a look at what the Mayor's plans are to build back better in terms of delivering healthy and sustainable housing. And I think we've got Sharon as well. So if you can both you know, chip in, that would be great.
Yeah.
Who wants to go first?
Yeah, so I'll kick off if that's okay.
Yeah.
So thanks. As Jill mentioned, I'm Ashland. I work in the GMCA Planning and Housing team, and we'll be providing a bit of perspective from the combined authority. So we're clearly still in the throes of battling the consequences of COVID, and naturally the focus is on supporting the significant and immediate needs of those most impacted by the virus. But the key messages now coming from leaders is to begin to build what comes next and to build back better. We shouldn't be returning to normal, but this is an opportunity to build a better future. So I really like Charlie's phrase about bouncing forward. That's really great.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity to take stock, rethink and set a new course. And I think in Greater Manchester, we've got some really great infrastructure already in place, which will help us with that. So clearly the pillars of the local industrial strategy are more relevant than ever. So the focus on that was around clean growth, digital, health innovation, advanced materials and manufacturing. And that provides a really excellent strategic framework and starting point, I think, for the conversations. But what's clear is Build Back Better needs to be a collaborative effort, and we need to assess how to co-create and do it collaboratively, and how to deliver a recovery from COVID that creates a fairer, greener and more equitable recovery. So this means working with partners like the GM housing providers and everyone in the sector and beyond. So I think the discussion today is really timely and really useful, because it would be great to hear from the group of what they think that means for housing in GM and what should our priorities be going forward. And I think Sharon will agree that just here to learn from people and groups in Greater Manchester, but in other parts of the country and best practice there. So I think it's really important to talk about the GM housing strategy, which we published last summer after a long period of consultation and co-production. And that sets out our plans to deliver housing differently. So together with the local industrial strategy, it provides a great strategic framework to begin building back better. So the headlines for the housing strategy was ambitions for safe, decent and affordable homes, with an increased focus on existing stock. So whether this is improving the experience of renters in the growing private renting sector or developing pathways for domestic retrofit. In the wake of COVID, this is not necessarily changing the path of this work, but makes activity more urgent, and maybe the need to refocus, accelerate, escalate delivery. And partnerships will be hugely important to the COVID recovery, and were identified as a big enabler for the GM housing strategy. And as Charlie referenced, the emerging tripartite agreement between the combined authority, housing providers and health and social care partnership is a great opportunity to build health into the system quickly and solidify the link between health and housing. So if I just focus a little bit on domestic retrofit before I pass on to Sharon, in the housing strategy, we commit to identifying pathways for volume domestic retrofit and reducing fuel poverty. Housing is a big part to play in low carbon, and new housing provision will need to take the agenda forward. However, arguably it's the existing stock where the biggest challenges lie. So 80% of the homes we live in by 2050 will already be built. That's a favourite stat that we use at the CA. So the residential sector must make a full contribution to our target of a carbon neutral city region by 2038. COVID has shone a spotlight on quality issues with home working demands, overcrowding, fuel poverty, comfort levels in the homes. And we're currently working to improve our understanding of the conditions and challenges of GM housing stock and domestic retrofit across GM. I'm looking at costed interventions as well. I think this will provide an essential view on the steps required for carbon neutrality and build back better. Undoubtedly plays into this need for early progress and innovation. Colleagues from the low carbon team would agree that building retrofit upgrades should form part of an economic stimulus package to support economic recovery and ensure healthy and efficient housing. And they're currently on with plans to develop a retrofit accelerator. But retrofit cuts across more than the low carbon agenda. It can support people to live in the home for longer and support integrated place-based approaches to driving growth and addressing inequalities, which have been highlighted massively by COVID. So really looking forward to the discussions today and hear views on what recovery looks like for housing. So I'll pass on to Sharon now, who leads our work in the private rented sector, and we'll look at what recovery might mean for the rented sector.
Hi, morning everybody. Sorry Jill, was I cutting across you there?
No, I was just welcoming you. So
okay. Thank you very much. And that denotes to me that you can hear me, so that's brilliant. So I'm going to follow on from Aisling and cover in particular one of the big questions that you're raising around the private rented sector. I'm going to do a little bit of context, if you don't mind, first of all, and then talk about and really just try and address the big question really around raising standards in the sector. So you'll all be aware, I'm sure, that the sector has massively grown in importance for us, and in terms of playing a part in the housing market. It's been and that's not least because it's massively grown, you know, over the last kind of 10-15 years. And not only that, it's really evolved as well. It's really changed, and its growth has actually been in combination with other quite significant tenure changes, which I'm sure you'll be aware of. So we've seen 130% growth in the sector in the two census points between 2001 and 2011. We now estimate that it's likely to be 1 in 5 households in GM in the PRS, which is a really high figure. And at the same time, we've seen reductions in social housing, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, quite critically, mainly through right to buy. And it now means that actually we're probably quite in close proportion terms in terms of the PRS and social housing. At 2011, social housing was at 21, 22%. The PRS was at 17. As I say, it's likely to have grown more. And actually, we've seen owner occupation, take a hit during them census points, and it's now about 60%. It was 65%, and probably likely to be less. It's a very varied and dynamic sector with different segments and markets. We've got high value, low value, all things in between. We've got professionally and unprofessionally managed stock, and we've actually got a situation where we've got a lot of the stock which is managed and owned by small numbers with small portfolios and a level of inexperience, and that's particularly so at the bottom of the end of the market. And in terms of changes to who it accommodates, we're now seeing many more families with dependent children and single adults. It's increasingly accommodating those in need with high levels of benefit dependency, and also providing interim accommodation for homelessness and other kind of vulnerable groups. Most of it operates really well, but you'll be familiar, I'm sure, with a lot of the challenges: affordability, access to those who increasingly need it, as mentioned, insecurity. Condition is a massive issue, and I think really pertinent for our discussion, because, combined with who we've got in the sector now and who manages the sector, we've now got some of the most vulnerable and least resilient people in living in some of the poorest conditions and actually managed by people with least ability, shall we say. So massive impacts on people's health and well-being in the sector. And so all these challenges that we've mentioned are felt much most prominently at the bottom end of the sector, and also where we have high concentrations of the PRS combined with other housing stress and other challenges. But on the positive, we all want to be positive, and actually there's a massive opportunity here, and that this is what we need to harness. And the sector really has, we've got the opportunity for it to play its full role and full potential in the housing market, providing accessible, good quality, affordable accommodation for those who choose, but also playing a big role in meeting housing need, including homelessness. And as we mentioned, in particular areas, also opportunity to create more sustainable neighbourhoods and contribute to regeneration. And as already been mentioned, and the real focus for us all at the moment, the COVID-19 and the current pandemic, as we're thinking about what do we do in response, which I'm going to touch upon in terms of what we're doing in the PRS, and we move to our recovery and reset phases, it is clear more than any other time that the PRS is really an area for us to tackle and realise these opportunities and build back better. So what are we doing about this? How do we meet the challenges and opportunities? You'll probably all be aware that there are many stakeholders involved in the sector, and stakeholder activity really has been evolving and switching up gears massively in recent years, really in recognition of the sector's importance and some of the challenges and issues. We've got quite a lot of good and exciting and new planned and existing work across the piece that's going on around the PRS. It's really heartening that. And you'll also be aware that it features very prominently in our GM housing strategy. I know that a lot of you have been involved in the co-production of the strategy, so you'll be well aware of that. It's got its own strategic priority. It's not hidden, which is fantastic. and it's also one of the Mayor's priorities alongside homelessness. So it's really high up there on the agenda. We have an implementation plan that sets out, that supports the strategy, setting out 5 interconnected areas of work around the sector. And importantly, I think for all aspects of the housing strategy, but in particular the PRS, the enablers of the strategy of lobbying, partnerships and evidence is really important in this space. So I'm not going to go into detail about the 5 areas of work that we are progressing. They are at different stages, but I'll just run through them quickly and give you a flavour of what they are and where we're up to. It's really important that to note, as always in housing, they're massively interconnected, these things, and mutually supportive. So one of the elements is about strategic partnership. We really want to get a strategic partnership together around the PRS with the key stakeholders. One of the big focuses of that will be around lobbying. There's a lot of lobbying that to be done, I think, in the PRS. We're quite close to getting this off the ground, actually. We are working towards a good landlord scheme for Greater Manchester. We've done a lot of work on development here, and a lot of you will have been involved in the co-production approach to developing a scheme. And I've actually put some proposals very recently to our portfolio lead on that, Paul Dennett. And whilst it's not going to tackle the bottom end per se, if we get a scheme that is robust and resourced proportionately, we can actually make some really good outcomes here, and we can make improvements across the sector. We've absolutely got to keep our eye on the resources here, but there's a way of doing it, as always, with efficiency and effectiveness and value for money in mind. But there's massive opportunity to achieve some really good outcomes through that scheme. Another aspect then is about tackling that real bottom end. So this is termed the rogue landlord hub. So that this is about tackling not just the bottom end, but the rogue element of that of this, which is small, but is actually really massively significant, as you'll probably all know. So this is about how we collaborate and innovate on such matters such as maximising our capacity and our approach and effectiveness around enforcement and the like. Another important component is the ethical letting agency. 5 partners, 5 housing provider partners involved in that. That's really, really positive in actually getting into the sector, taking or effectively taking it out of private landlords' hands through leasing arrangements for at least 5 years. That way we can be absolutely sure of the standards, not just of physical standards, but management standards and an ethical way of working, and actually access to that, to those properties, to people in need. And the ambition of growth is really significant on this. You know, we're talking about 800 properties going forward. I think there's 600 currently, if anybody knows anybody can correct me on that. So there's massive potential in that, and on already a really good grounding, making a massive difference. And the final one is about place-based intervention. As we've talked about, and as we all know, you know, there are particular areas where we have concentrations of inequality and stress and less resilience, combined with a lot of PRS. So we absolutely need to get into those areas and think about what we do to deal with that. And some of that is about changing the nature of those. So for instance, some of our partners around the ARP table, around acquisition, you know, One Manchester's been in some place in Manchester and acquired, have a presence in the area, really changed the area. So we're really keen to do more of that. So just to touch upon our more immediate response, our immediate work to COVID-19. And what we've been doing is a range of things in this space. One of the first things we did is to put some comms and information out there. People may be aware that there was quite a bit of confusion at the beginning with the government's announcements around eviction protection and the moratorium on eviction, and it was really important that we actually get some clarification out. We're still waiting for some guidance and further measures on that. We're actually doing a piece of work that's really live around providing further support to landlords and tenants around that engagement and approach to dealing with difficulties in paying rent, both for tenant and landlords here, and how that might hopefully not, you know, how that might lead to evictions, which we're absolutely trying to mitigate. We've been doing some work as well across our homelessness colleagues to open up the opportunities and reach out to landlords, private landlords, for accommodation, for move on, following the very short-term accommodation that's been brought, hotel and other accommodation that's been brought about through the Everyone In policy that Charlie was mentioning earlier. And we really want to open the sector and maximise its opportunity to deliver on meeting housing need and homelessness, so that it should hopefully pave the way for some of that.
Right.
Yeah, do you want me to stop, Jill? That I've just had a couple of we're doing some work around lobbying as well. So I think that's the end of it, really. I've come to the end, Jill.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'd really welcome your contributions.
Yeah, no, that's really great, Sharon and Aisling, because you know, it demonstrates what a, you know, comprehensive sort of you know, work that you are doing, but also, you know, that there is a huge opportunity here for Greater Manchester to do things differently, and to lead the way, and it's great to hear that the thought processes are alive and kicking. Indeed. I want to check, because the next person up is actually Jack Gould.
Yes.
You are there, Jack. So I can't see.
Hello.
So that's
yeah, I am here.
Yeah, great. So from the Greater Manchester Health and Social Care Partnership, you know, Greater Manchester is very lucky to have powers and this huge opportunity. And you know, I'm really interested to hear your take on, you know, where we are, what we can do, and how literally what you know, where we go from here. So over to you, Jack.
Brilliant. Okay, easy question. Fantastic. Sorry, everyone. I was a bit late. I've had a few technical issues, so I will be speaking to you as a disembodied booming voice, like the Wizard of Oz or something. So I'm just going to go through some of the policy background, what we've been doing in Greater Manchester in terms of health and social care. I'm going to run through a few of the projects that I've been lucky enough to be involved in over the past period of time at Greater Manchester Social Care. And then I'm going to reflect on, you know, some of the things that I've already said. Obviously, the importance of inequality, looking back at the last 10 years, and some of the structural forces at play when we're talking about housing, health in our society. So I guess the four projects that I'm involved in, one of them is the Greater Manchester Mental Health and Housing Strategy. The other one is dementia-friendly housing, also working on transforming care. That's a particular cohort of very complex needs people. And another one, which is in the Greater Manchester Housing Strategy, is the Healthy Homes Initiative. All of them require, you know, very proactive work between health and housing. Just focusing mostly on the mental health and housing strategy. Over the past decade, there's been an increased recognition nationally in policy circles about the clear links between mental health and housing. It's been given more priority in the NHS, and what we're looking to do is to get that parity of esteem for mental health services and physical health services In Greater Manchester, this has included Greater Manchester Mental Health Foundation producing their 2019-2022 housing strategy. We built on this at the end of December, and the terms of reference for our strategy, it's quite broad. It includes short and long-term strategic intentions in relation to service provision, commissioning, better collaboration between mental health and the housing sector. Key priorities include how we respond effectively to the needs of homeless and rough sleeper populations. So that includes mental health pathways from rough sleeper teams into mental health services linked to the NHS long-term plan. It's also really, really important that we develop a better offer for homeless families. I mean, we can talk this about days, but a lot of the evidence that we've done, it's no surprise that there's an enormous impact on mental health of homelessness, but for children in particular, children who are homeless are 3 to 4 times more likely to have mental health issues. That's not just common mental health problems like anxiety, depression, but more pronounced, like things like schizophrenia, personality disorders, things like that. But it also includes things like out-of-area placements and also the broader push for more population health approaches. So how can we embed mental health and mental well-being into our societies? And I think that housing and the housing sector, it has an enormous potential to do that, because so many of the institutions, whether they're landlords or tenants unions or housing associations, they have a very big public interface and they have local knowledge, and they're anchor institutions in the community. So when we're talking about that place-based approach and having a baseline across Greater Manchester for these sorts of population health models, I think housing has a really, really important part to play. Just going on to some of the specific issues that COVID-19 has thrown up, I think as a number of the other speakers have said, COVID-19 really has highlighted a number of the inequalities in our housing system. If you're looking at mentioned overcrowding, 80,000 households in Greater Manchester are overcrowded, and the impact of poor quality condition of overcrowding, and also to access to green space, it has huge impacts on your mental health, on coping strategies, particularly pronounced for children. And if we correlate the deprivation statistics with the housing statistics and things like school readiness, you begin to see the enormous effect that poor quality housing has on the population. It's quite hard, actually, when we're talking about methodology and building up our robust evidence base to get down to the impact of mental health, because often poor mental health and poor housing exist in a wider web of vulnerabilities, discrimination, disadvantage. It relates to each other. The impact as well of COVID-19, I think that many of you might have seen the Q2 analysis from the Resolution Foundation. It shows that, in terms of the labour market shocks, it's hitting the poor, the youngest and the oldest earners most, the youngest and the oldest, and it's also hitting social rented and the private rented sector most nationally. 4 in 5 social rented tenants either couldn't work or were furloughed, couldn't work from home, or they had a school-aged child to take care of during the lockdown. So when we're looking at patterns of disadvantage, that's really, really important. This is all really, really interesting work, but I think that one of the major problems, it's not a problem, it's a challenge to be addressed and to be tackled, is the difference between language between health and housing. Someone can be a tenant, someone can be a patient, someone can be a resident, it can be a scheme, a community, a town. And I think that it's just be aware that when we're talking about shared ambitions, to try and make the language as accessible as possible, this also has a massive impact on our evidence base. Obviously, the KPIs, the key metrics are going to be different for different stakeholders, and I think that it's important when we're building up our evidence base, first of all, to say that, look, we're not just doing this to show, you know, a picture of deprivation in Greater Manchester. This has to inform practice. It has to be built to be robust enough to inform decisions about resourcing. So, and that's true. That's true from a health and a housing perspective. In terms of some of the other things that I'm working on, I can talk about the mental health and housing strategy all day. And if anyone's interested in getting onto me about that, it's jack.gould1@nhs.net. In terms of dementia-friendly housing, what we're doing at the moment is sort of collating a response to the all-party parliamentary group inquiry into dementia-friendly housing, which was announced a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, we're not just talking about dementia-friendly housing here. We're talking about the wider Aging Well agenda. It's not just homes with assistive technology, but it's also projects which allow people to live independently in their home for longer. For example, the stuff that the projects in Stockport over the past couple of years have been really, really good in that respect. And also encouraging conversations with people about housing choice earlier in their life, so it doesn't get to the crisis point after a dementia diagnosis, which you know, happens quite a lot actually. Moving on to the complex needs, I think one of the interesting things about that and what we can do in terms of doing things better is localities working together and looking at it across Greater Manchester. So, you know, for serious mental health problems, particularly when that's joined with people, maybe they have learning disabilities, autism, a history of emotional trauma, their needs are incredibly bespoke, and the packages of care are very, very expensive and hard to actually take. And it leads to many people actually looking out of area, many commissioners looking out of areas to find that housing solution, obviously through necessity, but that's an enormous financial cost. And one of the things that we're looking to do is obviously like eliminate inappropriate out of area placements. We have a 10-point plan for that, which is mentioned in the mental health and housing strategy. But yeah, if we can look more to a Greater Manchester level and see where, if different localities have this sort of bespoke need, can we look to sort of team those up and utilize economies of scale across the piece? I think as well, one of the things I'd like to say is that a lot of the priorities, obviously we're looking at recovery and the crisis is here and present, but a lot of the longer term stuff is just as important. It's invest to save. And if we can make commitments about resourcing and about revenue funding, that there are housing providers who are willing to develop at risk to meet need. So it's just about being very, very proactive. Key relationships are really, really important. And of course, it's fantastic to see the work that Charlie's doing in the housing and health work at GMHP. More generally, and I think I'll end on this, and it's been touched on by a lot of the other people, it's difficult to look back at the last 10 years and not see the impact of inequality in Greater Manchester. I know over the past 30 years as well, like if you look at housing income, housing cost to income, it's risen fast, the most fast over the past 30, 40 years in the lowest income families. And there's a range of other indicators to say that housing is compounding income inequality on our societies, and it's having an enormous impact on health. Some of the things that we do are sort of like pigeonholed into it's sort of prioritized in a way where health isn't the most important thing. And I think one of the great things that we can take out of this crisis is a reaffirmation of the importance of public health, looking back to those, you know, brilliant and really innovative examples of local authorities working for the public good, you know, the 19th century public health initiatives, or the enormous council housing building boom in the interwar period. So
Yeah.
There's a number of opportunities.
Yeah. So Jack, I'm going to thank you very much there. There's been quite a few questions popping up around the dementia agenda, and but I'm going to move on very quickly, and I'm going to bring that back to life because we've still got quite a lot to go through, and I'm conscious of the time, and I want to get the discussion started. But to kick off that discussion, I'm very much hoping that Daniel Slade is on the line.
Hi.
You are?
Yeah.
Good. Because you're not on there. And also I can see Richard Blyth is there. So Daniel is from the TCPA, and we're working with him with the Healthy Homes and Buildings all-party parliamentary group that we run, but very keen to get his views because the TCPA are coming up with a healthy housing bill, and I think that's relevant. But the big question, really, Daniel, is just, you know, what do you think are the priorities in recovery, but also to look at how we actually move forward on changing the public's mindset, because this is an opportunity, an unprecedented opportunity, as they say, to look at that big connection between how we live and how the indoor built environment actually impacts on our health, physical and mental. So over to you, Daniel.
Brilliant, thanks. Yeah, and good morning from another disembodied voice. Looking through my notes before this conversation, I sort of reread Greater Manchester's housing strategy and worked through its strategic priorities. I thought it was fascinating. I mean, Greater Manchester's work on housing and planning, there's a lot to show what's possible in terms of building healthy new homes in neighbourhoods within the current policy framework. But that housing strategy, out of 8 of its strategic priorities, 5 required some kind of new powers, lobbying for regulatory reform, or policy reform for their delivery. The strategy itself calls for structural change. So I guess my provocation here really is, even with Greater Manchester's ambition and its uniquely powerful combination of both devolved powers on health and planning, even it doesn't have the powers it seems to need to properly deliver healthy homes and places. So I suppose my question is, to what extent do Greater Manchester's fullest ambitions for new healthy homes and neighbourhoods depend on housing law and policy reform at the national level? How do we work together to achieve that if we do actually think it's needed? Certainly at the TCPA, we think there's a fundamental need for legal change. For example, we need, but currently don't have, legally enforceable national minimum standards across a range of aspects of housing, which I think the general public will assume exist, but don't, for things like access to natural light. And a strong legal duty on both the planning system and the housing system to promote the well-being of residents, which again, currently doesn't exist. And you could argue there is no legally defined strong purpose for the planning and housing systems, joining them both together in the delivery of these objectives. I think this kind of change plays an important role, as you mentioned, in producing that conversation with the public. The public are, I think, generally quite aware that you can make the case that only Greater London has the powers it needs currently to really deliver on this agenda. And we're in need of actually national level reform, including in London as well. I think the public are aware of that, and this feeling of disempowerment is significant in pursuit of these objectives. So we've actually, as you mentioned, developed legislation which does this. I think it's a starting point for a conversation around this. How that legislation should look. It's fundamentally linked to people's ambitions for healthier places and engaging people with what the future of a post-COVID sort of a built environment should look like. And I'll just finish by saying I think one immediate intervention we can make to ensure that the housing system works for everyone, we badly need to end office to residential permitted development rights, which are having a terrible impact everywhere, including on Greater Manchester, and particularly on the most vulnerable. I think they're symbolic of the current state of much of the housing system, despite the best efforts and blood, sweat and tears of local authorities and combined authorities across the country. And I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah, no, that's great, Daniel, and I hope everybody thought that was useful to, you know that there is lobbying or that connection is happening. But I think one of the key points that's coming up again and again is how quickly we can get moving, and how can we use this opportunity to really get building back better. So I'm going to bring in Richard now, and he's ready and unmuted. So to give your take really on what the priorities are, and where your views. So Richard.
Hi. We've been here before economically in the global financial crisis, and we hear quite a lot of talk about, let's get back to normal. Let's, open the schools, let's back to normal. But I heard a wonderful thing from one of my sort of heroes in policy thinking, which is Professor Mazzucato of UCL, when she said, but normal is the problem. It wasn't good enough before. So yes, I would totally agree with bounce forward. But we need to bear in mind that the government is going to bring forward during this year a planning white paper, which is intended to accelerate planning and make it faster. And anticipating that, the Royal Town Planning Institute published last month 5 priorities for planning in England. First one will be invest in place, which I think includes investment in all forms of housing, not just housing for sale, and the infrastructure needed for it. Secondly, to refocus the planning system on 21st century issues. So we've got a planning system that's sort of designed for volume house building circa 1984, really. And we haven't heard much about volume house building this morning. It's a key issue for Greater Manchester. There's quite a lot of it happening. But there are wider concerns for a planning system, in our view, than simply the number of permissions for housing that you can sort of clock up, such as decarbonisation of the economy, including our homes, but also our transport. Issues like Dan's mentioned around the design and heating of homes. And I suppose one of the questions that that prompts us to ponder is whether we need a new national planning policy framework. I actually heard a very interesting statement from one of the government officials recently that was conceding that it might be necessary to allow for some variation in national planning policy between different parts of the country. And that might be, one of the reasons for that might partly be the interesting increase in the number of Conservative MPs from different parts of the country than there were before. I won't go through all the 5, but the 4th one I think is very important in this context, which is a clear direction for and support of strategic planning, which we mean planning such as Greater Manchester is carrying out. There are quite a lot of barriers to doing that well, and I have to say, also being provocative, that the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework has not been an altogether cheery story or a smooth ride. And yet, the world's eyes are on Greater Manchester, because this is the crucible of how you can draw all the key investment issues in one area together. And I would include in that how you get investment in transport to work. And Mayor Andy has been fantastic on the national stage at flying the flag for not only what you can do if you pull together, but also drawing attention to the disgraceful shortfalls in funding for areas such as Greater Manchester by comparison with London. But the virus has certainly shown us that we need to think very carefully about how people are going to move around areas like Greater Manchester, and particularly how people are going to move around who don't have access to a car, but also people who do, because if you were to see a substantial increase in commuting by car through fear of the use of public transport, that's going to create some very severe challenges for somewhere like Greater Manchester. which have implications for, you know, how you house people and how they get to work. I think that's probably enough from me before we go into discussion. Thank you.
Richard, thanks very much for that. Very thought-provoking and big questions, obviously, around, again, how we work, live, rest and play in the future. I think what I'd like to do, because I can see there's quite a few questions, particularly I'm going to call in Jonathan and Kath, if you're there. There's a couple of points just to quickly respond, and also Charlie. There's a little conversation going on here in the chat. So, Jonathan, you've raised quite a few points. One was around modular build, which Richard just referenced in terms of new ways of building back quicker, you know, greener. But the whole thing around the green recovery, you know, is huge, really. And I know it's very big on Andy Burnham's agenda as well, to sort of how we can actually, you know, if we have got a lot of unemployment, how do we actually, you know, get that sort of shovels in the ground around retrofit and new build. Such a, you know, I think we've opened up a bit of a can of worms here. There's such a huge Pandora's box of issues that, but the key thing I think we want to get out of today is how we can join it all up and really sort of, you know, be in a situation, because I've heard the word lobby more times than I normally do, which is great coming from a lobbyist. But the whole thing, we've got an opportunity here in Greater Manchester to say this is what we're doing it and getting on with it. So, in no particular order, Jonathan, Kath, and Charlie. Jonathan first.
Well, I made 2 points. The first one was the point that you've eloquently already mentioned, really, Jill, in terms of modular housing. Has its time come? The fact that you can, it's possible to build housing in a controlled manner. So far, it's been very much experimental science. We've done lots of housing, and it's really been small schemes we've been involved with. So for housing associations, so has its time come? I think the rest you've said eloquently, Jill. The other point I wanted to mention, because it picked up on what a number of people had mentioned, and it's a kind of what can we do now, which was on temporary social housing and on specially supported housing. The social housing regulator has given some detailed guidance now about what the rules about this, and they've been about perhaps putting people back in their place in terms of schemes they've developed, but it gives a unique opportunity, I think, for people to engage, make sure that the schemes that they bring to market fit those rules, and then actually tackle the very people that this crisis has shown we've fallen short of, as Charlie mentioned right at the start. I think there's a real opportunity for those people who are in bed and breakfasts, in hotels at the moment, or on the street, where you could frame schemes using the guidance from the regulator to address that need. And that's something that's right there, and there's money that is right there as well, since it's all paid by housing benefit. So that's me, Jill.
Yeah. Okay, Kath.
Thanks very much. Just a couple of points I'd pick up, really. I think what I've heard from this conversation is we have got so many priorities to sort of focus on. You can actually lose sight of what you're trying to achieve, and I think that's been really evident from the kind of contributors, I think, today. But if I just focus on a couple, I think we need to kind of look at modern methods of construction, which, you know, we keep saying there's pilots here, pilots there, and a lot of housing providers in Greater Manchester and in the north have actually built through modern methods of construction. But I think for the first time, what I've seen over the last few months is providers and local authorities coming together. So the Homes for the North is a consortium of quite large housing providers, and they've been doing quite a lot of work on this, and recently started dialogue with the combined authority. And I think that's what's been needed, the conversation between the whole parties, and that will be an investment model. So stick your hand up and join in if you're prepared to put some money in. Otherwise, step aside and we'll crack on. And then I think the other thing we've got to think about is retrofitting existing stock. we talked, Sharon's talked there about the private rented sector and obviously social housing. If we are going to get to a carbon neutral or zero carbon housing stock, it's going to take money and existing stock. I think that's one of the points that Charlie made. So if there's something we can lobby together on, that would, which about zero carbon, is about retrofitting existing stock costs money. And I think that's, you know, a big message. And my final point I would make is that I think the Greater Manchester Housing Strategy is very clear on its priorities. And actually, I think it does a really good job of connecting to other agendas as well. It connects to the carbon emissions, it connects to modern methods, it also connects to health. So I think that's one of the kind of, I think it's a really concise and brilliantly written document. I haven't written it, my colleagues in the CA have, but I think they've had a really good crack at trying to make something really complicated simple. And if you know, if you've not really looked at it in any great detail, I just urge you to do that to see. So that's my phone going off. I'd urge you to have a look at that, and maybe we can have follow-up conversations.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kath. I think you're right. It's going back to that point that we have thought about it, and we're lucky to have a mayor that's trying to bring it together. And I think, you know, it's really, I suppose, in the sort of where we are, I think we've all seen that there's been a national response and very little regional or you know, influence about how we move forward to recovery. And I think that there, as I said, there's an opportunity to do things differently, as it says on the Greater Manchester Strategy, and that's why we're here today, really, to kickstart that debate. Charlie, I'm going to bring you back in, but please, people put their hands up or whatever if you want to come in as well, or come back to respond to anything that's been said in particular. I've got a couple here, so we're not short, but and I'll bring in, I think I'm going to bring in Linda Robinson, Councillor Linda Robinson, and probably Hannah Roberts, who I met last time as well, to comment from local authorities. Yeah. Charlie.
Thanks, yeah, thanks. You're proud to see that I carry mine around with me, Kath, so I don't think you've got it with me. It is brilliantly done. Kath's made the point, really, which is about the priorities that we've got, that there's so many of them that we really do need to now very seriously look at what we need extra funding for, and then organise ourselves, because we're clear on what they are. It's just organising them, isn't it, and leveraging our partnerships to do that. And I just wanted to make the point that we're very lucky, as you said, Jill, that we are in such a devolved region with great civic leadership, and we really do need to take advantage of that, especially with the health and social care position that we've got, which is unique in the country. So we really do need to take advantage of that now. And just to play about commissioning, and Jack mentioned commissioning, we haven't cracked that one yet, and we do need to look at commissioning, especially for revenue funded activity like social care, so, and putting wraparound support around people. So and it needs to be longer term, and it needs to be a bit more sophisticated. And I've got a phrase which I always use, which is about a little bit about getting over ourselves to get stuff done. So, and I do think now's the time to do that, I really do. And just one last plea, which is about young people. We had a care leaver event yesterday about pledges that the GM housing providers have made to support young people leaving care. And I do think we need to ramp that one up the agenda, not just the care leaver agenda, but young people generally, because I do feel, somebody said before, that younger people and older people have been really disproportionately affected by the pandemic, and the economic impact and the access to jobs and education for younger people has been severely affected. So that needs to feature very heavily in thinking about future housing needs and support needs. So, and I'll leave it at that, thank you. So get over ourselves and get stuff done.
Yeah, and bounce forward. That's what we're going to do. What I'm Linda, are you there? Linda Robinson, Councillor.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there you are, yeah. Okay, it'd be lovely if you could, I know you might have missed some of the debate, but ultimately it'd be great to hear your thoughts on, you know, priorities.
Right. Well, I have asked Emily if I can have the minutes from the meeting anyway.
Yeah, we will do.
When Charlie was talking earlier on, I wanted to come in on a question on that, because even though we're looking forward and do housing in the future, we've got to remember we're talking about the elderly. They need to see where they can get public transport to and from everywhere. Where I am, I sit between two major motorways, and so I'm not about still have people where I live that can't get transport to public areas. So because of the house where they live is miles away from those. So business junction 19. There's no big ones. I was to take traffic out town centre. But on top of that, we're going to be building properties. But the properties have got to be the right mix with transport on the doorstep. And this is across the board. So there is a transport one, but also we've got to remember we had a clear out of some back alleys, and we've come across elderly people living on their own, didn't even have a bathroom and were still using an outside toilet. So we do have an elderly population that have been falling through the net, and not because of us, but because of situations and circumstances. And the other thing is, when I'm on the GMCA, and Hannah will back me up on this, I've got concerns when we're talking about climate change and how properties have to go up, maybe all electric. I've always asked the question of the mayor, how is this going to help the elderly that can't even afford to pay the bills now? And that's one of my big ones. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah, that's great. No, that's a big issue, really. I mean, there's going on about, who pays for this, and it's getting the right balance, really, in terms of, does the consumer pay, or where does that fall? But, in the whole process of getting the economy working, we need to get those jobs going. So it's a really interesting point you've raised there, Linda, and one I'm sure we're going to return to over the months ahead. Now, can I bring Andrew? You've been quite lively on the chat, and just wondered if you wanted to say anything. No, Andrea? No. And I was going to bring in, Andrea, there you are. Just wondered if I wanted to bring you in, and also Tamara, maybe just to have a quick reference, and I think then I'll go to Mike Leonard as well, as that's the next three. Is that okay? Mute. We're not hearing you, Andrea. No. Okay. Don't know why, because it is unmuted, but I'll move on quickly tomorrow, if you don't mind, if you can unmute, because you were referencing your, you spoke at the last session we had, but you've also referenced some recent work that RICS has done around net zero. Tamara, where have you gone?
Yep, so I'm here, I'm speaking, sorry. We last week we released a policy document around decarbonising of our existing housing stock. One of the things that we've sort of think, especially, well, we've been working on the paper for some time, but we think it's particularly good around COVID, is a lot of people are going to be looking at, because we've been spending all our times within our houses, is how we're currently using our homes, and people may be looking to retrofit or renovate their own home to, to increase it, as well as that whole thing that we saw after the GFC was the consumer confidence of people maybe not feeling fiscally stable enough to maybe move a home, so they actually make their current home more suitable for what their current needs are, whether it's extending or building on extensions to make it slightly larger. But through all of that, that's a really good way of getting those SME builders to get back in and start getting them business and getting them back in into working, because it's smaller jobs and all of that, and it plugs that gap between maybe developments can start starting off for them. But one of the things that this paper actually does is sort of says is that, well, when people are renovating and when they are retrofitting, they're not actually thinking about greening their home or decarbonising their home. And there maybe needs to be a little bit of incentive and thought process into going into how we get these people who put in a new kitchen or who expand out and put on like a conservatory onto their home, to actually make those moves to actually decrease the carbon within their home and to actually make it a little and slightly greener home. So that's sort of a small summary of the paper. There's so many more areas to it, but I think in most linked to COVID and coming out of COVID, that's what we're probably one of the main areas that we're sort of looking at and pushing at the moment is how we can start. Is that a reference to MMC? Yeah. It's not just a reference to MMC in terms of greening. It's into everything. It's sort of it's just, it sounds horrible, but it's not a thought process at the moment. There's, to be rather blunt about it, there's no if you're looking at two homes and one's got a better energy efficiency and got better greening and all that, and to another, there's no difference in value that isn't currently reflected within value. And I know people throw back and say, well, RSS, you guys are the valuers, but we value comparatively to a market sort of thing. So there isn't really the market. Oh, sorry, that was in response to Mike. Okay, sorry. But yeah, so sorry. Okay, well then I've gone on this whole rant for nothing. So that was be all of it. And then just to quickly, my other point would be around the original conversation around older homes and all that. One of our sort of things is that nobody wants to think about being old and nobody wants to think about how we age. And the fact is that within the UK, we're not great at making whole life homes. So therefore homes that are really good for disabled people that can also work for people as they age, as well as for, you know, if you've got a pusher or a parent or young children, you probably have very similar needs to maybe somebody who has a wheelchair and all of that, or even somebody who's maybe got lower mobility because of, you know, because of age. But we're not really doing that, and people aren't really thinking about how their current home will suit. Nobody sat in, and I don't want to assume, but nobody's really sat in their house right now thinking, yeah, this probably won't work for me in about 10 years time if I start losing a bit of mobility, because nobody wants to think like that. We all want to think that, you know, we're still going to be running marathons at 99. And, you know, I know, so I think that's one of the things that we found in trying to engage with people on older homes is that the hardest thing is that mental of making people actually think about it. We'll plan for our retirement, but we don't plan of where we're going to live in that retirement.
Yeah. Thanks very much for that, Tamara. You know, big thing around attitudes, behavioural change. I think, you know, we're still going to see so much of that. I think that's a big part of the influence. Andrew, I'm just really shouting out to see if you can actually...
Yeah, I've put my headphones in now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yes, it must have been the mic on my computer, sorry. Just young people.
I'm going to bring in Mike Leonard and Jane Stephen, and we're probably coming up to time then. So, Andrea, over to you.
Yeah, it was just young people. I'm just really glad Charlie mentioned it. I think a big thing at the moment is employment. A lot of people are coming out of school, colleges, universities. Just a bit of a focus really on apprenticeships, graduates, that type of thing, and how we can sort of input into that into the Greater Manchester agenda really. The zero carbon by 2038, I think, you know, existing properties, retrofitting, it's a real challenge. And it'd be good to sort of hear more from GMCA on that and key targets and what their priorities are and what's going to happen first and then move forward. And I think that's about it from me, yeah.
All right, well, great for that. So I'm quickly going to go to Mike, who's sitting in Birmingham, I think, but there you go, nice to see you.
yeah, sunny Birmingham too. Thank you. So I just want to pick up on this sort of kind of fascination that everybody seems to have with modern methods of construction or modular construction or any other pseudonym it wishes to go under. And just say, look, the dynamic has changed massively. Part of the reasons why people were saying that, of course, was trying to suggest that we hadn't got the skills to build the houses going forward. That is now replaced by a picture that says that our manufacturing businesses, we manufacture all the traditional materials that we build houses with in the UK. So 80% of what goes into a house is made here at the moment. Currently, modern methods of construction use lightweight steel, mostly coming from China, and timber coming from all over the world, all on dirty ships, because they never get the best ships to sell those sorts of materials on. And those houses are designed to last 60 years, as opposed to 150 years for a traditional house, and designed to take away jobs. So, you know, no suggestion that these are greener than traditional housing, because they're not. And equally, they're relying on imports, and also there's some performance issues around fire and indoor air quality and overheating, all those sorts of things. So I just think that we should be backing British businesses, British jobs now. We're in a post-COVID, post-Brexit scenario. You know, this is really important, and it's really important for the regions. This is coming at, it's a London idea where they don't manufacture anything being imposed on the regions, and we're buying it like it's something brand new.
Yeah, I think the next session, or we will be talking about innovation, and I'm pretty sure we'll focus more in on that, particularly in terms of recovery and innovation. But I think that modular, you know, solution, you know, in terms of numbers, is an interesting one when you link it to zero carbon decarbonisation of housing. So yeah, thanks for that. And can I quickly invite James Stevens? Are you unmuted, James? The House Builders Federation, Home Builders Federation.
Hello there. Hi, Jill. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, look, I'll try and be brief. I think Mike Leonard makes an interesting point, which is that the MMC agenda has really been seen as a kind of magic bullet to a lot of problems. That's a pace of building and skills. And it was less interested in, I think, about underlying research and development. And that brings me to the point that I think that Richard Blyth was making, and his quote that the normal, trying to get back to normal, is the problem, which is very true. And I think Richard makes a very important point there. And the COVID-19 crisis has exposed a lot of problems, and the fact that a lot of the poorest paid are those who are at the sharp end of dealing with the crisis. And it is right that probably coming out of this, there will need to be a new social contract in which definitely we don't want to return. The aim shouldn't be to go back to how things were. And in terms of research and development, I think you know, I think key to recovery will be a lot more investment in research and development and innovation in this country generally, but also within the construction sector. However, I'm kind of thinking about what can be realistically achieved in the short term. And that's why I was interested in what Daniel Slade said. And he made what I thought was a very apposite observation, was that in the short term, the aims of the Greater Manchester Housing Strategy will be dependent upon existing housing and planning law and policy. And to a certain extent, there will be limitations in terms of how many of those 8 strategic objectives can be achieved. However, we can make great strides to meeting some of those if we can get those embedded in planning policy. And that's why I'm interested in the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, which Richard Blyth talked about. We could get things like zero carbon targets imposed, that certainly minimum standards for development, space standards, in particular would be a good route to achieve that. So I'm just thinking in terms of a response, perhaps we need to think about what can be done in the short term, and then think about lobbying for what we need regionally and nationally in terms of a change to the status quo. Thank you.
Yeah, well, excellent contributions. I'm just looking at you actually nodding there, and I just wondered if you wanted to come back, because you had a few questions which were directly around GMSF and the strategy. So I think I might end with you, and maybe Charlie is just a quick comment with you, and I'll round it up, and then we've had a really good time. Thanks, Ashling.
Yeah, so I just wanted to come back on the points around the housing strategy and actually we don't have the powers actually to deliver everything that we set out in the strategy, but that was almost like a deliberately honest assessment, because the structural changes that us as a city region can tackle on our own. So then the strategy became, how can a GM voice add value? How can it amplify what we require? So simple example could be around welfare provision, linking housing benefit and universal credit to the quality of the property in the PRS. That's something that's not within our power, but would actually make great strides in actually addressing the quality issue. So I think it's really important in some respects that the housing strategy is a bit of our lobbying piece. This is our really structured message of these are our priorities for the city region over the next 5 years. And actually, I think having seen the impacts of COVID, it almost stands the test of time that we're still talking about the same issues as well, just obviously different timescales and accelerating the needs on particular points. And I suppose wanted to come back, but my final point would be, I think it's really important that we show the success of the powers that we've already been granted. So I think the tripartite agreement will be a huge achievement for the city region in actually bringing together health and housing in a really codified way.
Yeah, that's great. And also Hannah, on the chat, I'm picking up those points, and I think we'll feed that into the minutes and come back to that. But Charlie, just a really general wind up from you, and then I'll take over the baton.
Thanks, Jill. I think it's really been a brilliant and very wide-ranging debate that we've sort of whizzed through, haven't we? Which is, and so many ideas and so many contributions. It just sort of highlights how many priorities we've got, and the fact that we really need to hone down now and balance those priorities. The lobbying thing has come out really loudly about using our collective voice, because we have a very strong voice in Greater Manchester, to either go for more devolution powers and more devolution money, or to lobby central government about investment in existing homes, green economy, that kind of thing. So, I just wanted to say we need to work really hard to recover from what's happened. And you know, when I say bounce forward and optimism, I am a sort of glass 3/4 full kind of person, but I do realise that people are really struggling, and it's been a horrible situation for so many people. So we really need to use the partnerships we've got, the genuine hard-working partnerships that we've got, to work like we've never done before on recovering, and then creating opportunities and addressing all the inequalities that have been laid bare. So, but massive thank you to everybody for the contributions. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very Yeah, thanks, Charlie. And it's just a really, you know, just a reminder, we don't really know the scale or the impact of, you know, it's not just a recession, but, you know, how many people will be unemployed and how that will hit the housing market. And, you know, so it's been, you know, we probably scratched the surface of Greater Manchester, and also looked a bit more nationally. There will be a whole reprioritisation process, but the point about lobbying is so important, because there's a huge competition out there, and there's been an awful lot of promises made by central government around more powers and around investment, you know, whether it's transport or housing. So it's making sure that, you know, where we know there needs to be change, and there is clearly a very clear connection about, you know, our housing and how we live and our health. You know, I think it has to be the time for us to move forward on that. I'm very much hoping that you'll all tune in to the next session, which is on the 12th of June, and which is really around delivering innovation, investment and powers, which we've touched on today. So we can continue this discussion. It is really like, how do we move forward? How do we do those things differently in Greater Manchester? What are we good at, but also looking at the housing market as well. And I'm working with Jonathan Cox as well on that. So look out for that one. I think it only remains for me to say is thank you for tuning in. I hope you'll take it back and we'll carry on the discussion. And as I say, when we talk about outputs, part of that output is very much lobbying. One of the things we will be doing with the Greater Manchester All-Party Parliamentary Group will be bringing this discussion into Parliament as well. So we'll take it forward in that way. But I mean, my goodness, well done. And thanks for joining us, and have a lovely weekend. Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks for everybody for your help.